Hey guys, tonight we drift into the strange, warm-scented world of ancient Egypt where your paycheck didn't jingle in your pocket, it crumbled in your hands. Imagine this, the Nile glistens in moonlight, reed boats creak softly as they nudge the riverbank, and in the distance you hear the unmistakable thud of 1,000 flat loaves being slapped onto hot stones. That's not breakfast. That's currency. Yes, you're about to fall asleep to the story of how bread, yes, actual, edible bread, was once more valuable than gold, especially if it came with a side of beer. A world where bakers were basically bankers, your daily wage came dusted with flour, and a clever scribe might embezzle an entire month's income by miscounting barley sacks. You probably won't survive this economy without crumbs in your tunic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing the global sleep map light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake on a low, woven mat as a rooster announces a new day over the eastern Nile. You're inside a whitewashed adobe home, sunlight filtering through a small window shaped like a keyhole. It smells like wood smoke and barley porridge. Outside, the city stirs, traders yelling greetings, the squeaky creak of carts laden with pottery, and above it all, the rhythmic grumble of grain being ground by hand. You pull on a linen shift, it's coarse, breezy, and probably not your color, and step out into the street. You're not headed to a bank, because in this town, no such place exists. But you are going to handle wages, expenses, and maybe even a little ancient financial drama. And it all starts with a loaf. Around you, commerce hums not with coin, but with food. Specifically, the staple of every Egyptian table, emmer wheat bread. It's tough. It's dense. It's nutritious enough to keep workers going through 13-hour days. And it's everywhere. You follow a crowd to a public square where a foreman counts heads and hands out rations. Every man receives a loaf. Some receive 3, others only half. It depends on your rank, your job, and whether or not the foreman likes you. You receive 1 full loaf, congrats, you're average. Now imagine this system at scale. Farmers harvest wheat, bring it to granaries. Granaries record how much they've received. That wheat is then issued to state workers, builders, soldiers, scribes, in the form of processed food, mainly bread, sometimes beer. There are no coins, no banknotes, just flat, oval-shaped hunks of baked grain. And somehow it works. Mainstream historians will tell you that Egypt's economy was built on redistribution. Central authority, often the temple or the palace, collected resources and allocated them. But here's where it gets weird. This redistribution wasn't just efficient. It became habitual. People expected bread. They organized their lives around bread. Being breadless wasn't just poor, it was shameful. And that brings us to a lesser-known fact. There was, essentially, a bread class system. Archaeologists have found walls covered in labor logs. They list names, job titles, and here's the fun part, the bread allocation. There's a painter from Deir el-Medina who earned 2 loaves and half a jug of beer a day. The guy next to him only got 1 and a bowl of lentils. Either he was bad at his job, or the painter had killer negotiation skills. Now, in case you're wondering, why not just use coins? Egypt did have precious metals, gold especially. But coins, as a medium of exchange, didn't really show up until the late period, long after the pyramids were finished and Cleopatra had eyeliner in her budget. Before that, barter ruled. And in a barter economy, bread had staying power. It was perishable, yes, but it could be made daily, stored for weeks, and represented tangible labor. You wander past a bakery, its clay oven radiating heat. Women knead dough on low tables. Kids stomp wheat kernels to loosen the chaff. The baker hands a steaming loaf to a waiting man, who in turn offers a clay jug of milk. No haggling, just mutual need. The deal is sealed with a nod. Quirky side note. Some loaves had shapes or stamps to indicate their value. There's evidence that pyramid workers were issued cone-shaped breads marked with an official seal, like ancient notary bread. You'd never guess you were holding a paycheck, unless it was still warm. And still, historians debate the boundaries of this so-called bread economy. Some argue it was a true proto-currency system, others insist it was just rationing dressed up as economics. There's even a third camp who believe we're projecting modern ideas onto a very different worldview, one where value wasn't abstract but tasted like fermented grain. You pause at a granary compound, thick mud brick walls, narrow gate, guarded by 2 young men armed with staffs. Inside, rows of giant silos hold this year's harvest. You can smell the wheat through the cracks. You also spot a scribe with a reed pen etching inventory onto a long scroll. He's the accountant of this operation. Mess with him and your ration may mysteriously drop by half. You glance down at your loaf. It's dense, cracked, and already going a bit stale. But it represents more than lunch. It's payment. It's status. It's a tiny chunk of state infrastructure nestled in your palm. And tonight, when your stomach is full and you stretch out under a blanket that smells faintly of river water and straw, you'll think this place runs on bread. Not because it's simple, but because it's human. The next morning, you wake to the dry hiss of sand brushing against the side of your home. It's barely dawn and already the sun throws long amber slashes across the city walls. You're headed to the worksite today, somewhere just outside the capital near a limestone quarry where laborers are carving blocks for a noble's tomb. You're not lifting the stones. You're here for something far more valuable, to watch the bread flow. There's no whistle to start the shift. No clock to punch. Just a steady trickle of workers showing up at their posts, rubbing sleep from their eyes and murmuring greetings. You trail behind them to a little table set up under a scrap of linen. This is the wage station. A foreman sits beside a stack of baked goods, flanked by a couple of serious-looking men holding ledgers made of palm fiber. Your job today? Observe the system that turns baked starch into government payroll. Each man steps forward, announces his name and profession. Stonemason, chisel sharpener, water carrier, and receives his daily allotment. Not just bread, mind you. Sometimes it's beer, onions, dried fish, or a tiny measure of oil. But the bread is constant. It's the spine of the deal. You notice that the loaves differ, some darker, some lighter, some oblong, some round. The ones given to high-ranking artisans are always fresh. Slightly warm. Richer in barley. The lower-ranking laborers? Their bread is smaller, denser, maybe a day old. It's a clear signal of hierarchy. You don't need a uniform when your lunch shouts your status. Now here's something historians debate. Was this wage system designed to maintain order, or just to avoid famine? It's possible the bread economy started out as survival strategy during harsh agricultural cycles. But others argue it was all about control. When the state controls the bread, it controls the people. And let's be honest, if someone held your snacks hostage, you'd listen too. You follow the scribes into a shaded corner where they're marking the day's distribution. They don't use numbers the way you know them. Instead, they draw tiny pictograms for loaves, jars, and workers. It's a tidy system, but also ripe for corruption. One extra stroke of the pen and suddenly a baker is short. Or a foreman is very, very full. Here's your quirky fact of the day. At one point, there was such a severe bread shortage among tomb builders at Deir el-Medina that the workers went on strike. Yes, the world's first recorded labor strike, fueled not by money but by missing carbs. They downed tools, marched to a temple, and demanded their rations. The state relented. Bread resumed. Pyramids progressed. As you walk back into the quarry, you watch workers chew their wages between tasks. It's not just fuel. It's identity. You can tell where a man stands in the world by the grain between his teeth. You pass one fellow with a chunk of crust wedged behind his ear, saving it for later. Another hoards his under a flat stone, already planning to trade it. Because yes, bread was bartered. A good baker could get you sandals, linen, even medicine in exchange for high-quality loaves. Some people even paid temple priests in bread for blessings or spells. In essence, it was a self-sustaining economy made from flour and fire. You lean against a sun-warmed wall and consider this. No coins to jingle, no gold to flash. Just the daily rhythm of earning and eating. And because bread spoils, it must be replaced constantly. You can't hoard it. You can't flaunt it forever. It demands that you live in the moment, that you participate. The system didn't last forever, of course. Eventually, coins did arrive. First from Greek influences, then from Rome. But even then, the bread and beer model lingered. It was too deeply baked into the culture. Even Cleopatra herself likely paid palace workers in kind. Back at the worksite, the sun reaches its apex. The quarry is loud with shouting, hammering, and the occasional burst of laughter. You spot a younger boy sprinting by, carrying a woven basket. Inside, a dozen loaves, steaming gently. He delivers them to a group of older men working at the top of the hill. Special delivery, maybe an extra shift reward, maybe a favor called in, maybe a bribe. That's the beauty of bread. It's versatile. And now we arrive at a crossroads. Was bread really currency? Or was it just daily food cleverly distributed? Some scholars argue that because it wasn't standardized, it fails the currency test. Others insist its role in structured labor payments, exchange networks, and temple accounting make it clear. This was money with a crust. You don't need an answer. Not right now. You just need a place to sit. You find shade beneath a makeshift awning where two women crush barley with stone mortars. Their hands are flour-dusted, their chatter light. You offer to help. They laugh and pass you a pestle. Your arms burn within minutes. The bread economy is not for the faint of heart. As the sun sets, a gentle coolness washes over the desert. Workers file out of the quarry, some munching their final mouthfuls, others holding tomorrow's rations tight. There's no gold clinking in their pockets, just the comfort of a full stomach and a quiet walk home. You follow them in silence, your tunic smelling of barley and effort. This world may not have vaults or credit cards, but it has all the trappings of an economy. Trust, exchange, labor, and reward, all baked to perfection. You wake the next morning in a small adobe dwelling, nestled among a row of similar homes just outside the city wall. The bread you earned yesterday sits wrapped in linen near your sleeping mat. It's grown slightly hard overnight, but you chew it thoughtfully, soaking it in a bit of date water to soften the crust. This bread isn't just breakfast. It's a receipt, a silent nod that you've contributed something useful, that the machine of the state still turns and you're one of its gears. Out on the street, the village hums to life. You follow a group of women down to the communal ovens. These are long, low domes made of sun-dried mud, and the scent wafting from them is warm and nutty. The air buzzes with gossip and the slap-slap of dough against stone. One woman is shaping flatbreads, another is brushing the insides of the oven with date syrup for a sweet crust. You recognize her from the quarry kitchen. She's a master of multitasking and side hustles. Today, she's baking extra to sell or trade. And that's the real twist. These women, technically not on the state payroll, are still deeply embedded in the bread economy. While men earn standard loaves for their labor, women often produce surplus on the side, feeding local markets, temple offerings, even bartering with neighbors for goods. They've created a shadow market, powered by flour and instinct. One older woman gestures for you to help. She hands you a gourd of water and some barley flour, then shows you how to knead by folding with your palm, pressing in with the heel of your hand, rotating, repeat. The rhythm is oddly soothing, somewhere between a meditation and a workout. As the dough rises, she tells you a story about an ancestor who once paid a midwife with 5 loaves and a dried fish. You ask if that was considered a good deal. She shrugs and says, she didn't drop the baby, so yes. Here's your quirky fact. Archaeologists have found ancient bread molds still bearing fingerprints. Literal, fossilized evidence that someone's hands, someone just like you, pressed dough into these clay trays 4,000 years ago. There's something oddly comforting about that. You, the loaf, the oven, none of it has changed all that much. Now about that loaf again. It's not uniform. Not every piece of bread was created equal. Some were shaped like fish, turtles, or geese, often used in temple rituals. Others were dense bricks with a longer shelf life, suitable for travel or storage. And some were soft rolls intended for the elite, more symbolic of status than nutrition. If you were really lucky, yours might even be sweetened with honey or flecked with sesame seeds. This brings us to an open debate. Were certain types of bread reserved for specific social classes, or did everyone occasionally splurge on a fancy loaf when they could? Some scholars argue that temples and royalty had exclusive rights to enriched breads. Others think the lines were more blurred, with festivals offering moments of edible equality. A rich man's bread might become a poor man's feast once a year, especially during major religious ceremonies. By midday, the village square fills with informal traders. You spot a man hawking sandals in exchange for 4 loaves. Nearby, a barber offers haircuts for a round roll and a swig of beer. There's even a healer advertising herbal salves and poultices. His sign, a board with sketches of an eye, a snake, and, you guessed it, a loaf. This is the bread market in action. No coins, no bills, just dough, both literal and metaphorical. You sidle up to a small booth where a priest is blessing loaves offered to the gods. People bring bread shaped like birds or pyramids, placing them carefully on an altar. Some write small prayers on bits of papyrus and tuck them under the loaves. The smell of incense mixes with the baking air. This is commerce wrapped in devotion. The priest tells you, half laughing, that once someone tried to bribe a temple guard with a honeyed loaf still warm from the oven. The guard took it, and so did the gods, apparently. No one saw him for a week. As the sun begins to dip, casting gold across the village's mud walls, the ovens go quiet. Ashes swept out. Loaves are counted, packed, and divided. The rhythm slows, but the value remains. Tonight, a feast is being prepared in the central courtyard. You watch as neighbors contribute. Some bring onions, others a handful of lentils. But everyone, without fail, brings bread. It's stacked in baskets, laid out on mats, broken and passed around like currency and communion at once. A child giggles as he tries to juggle 2 rolls. An older man toasts a flatbread over a fire and then offers it to you with a wink. "Better than gold," he says, chewing contentedly. And he's not wrong. You lie back on a woven mat, your belly full of the day's wages. The moon rises slowly, casting pale silver light over the square. A woman sings softly from her doorway, her voice rising and falling like the Nile. And it hits you, this economy, this culture, this entire civilization runs not on monuments or armies or scrolls, but on something simple, something daily, something warm, bread. The next morning, you're drawn to the riverbank where the scent of damp earth mixes with the smell of yeast. It's early, mist still clings to the reeds, but the place is already alive with noise and motion. You're here because you've heard whispers of a particular kind of bread, one that doesn't come from the communal ovens or temple kitchens. This bread is different. Portable, tough, often gritty. It's the soldier's loaf. You find them kneeling by the shore, men with shaved heads and rough linen tunics, greasing small satchels with animal fat. Inside, they pack tightly wrapped rolls nearly as hard as stone and about as appetizing. These are rations not meant to be enjoyed, just endured. Perfect for long marches. You bite into one and immediately regret it. It's like gnawing a brick. One of the soldiers laughs, offers you a jug of beer to soften the experience. Soldiers didn't just fight with spears and shields. They fought with bread. A well-fed unit could march for days. A hungry one faltered before the enemy even arrived. Some battalions were issued loaves as part of their pay. Each soldier might receive a fixed quota per week. Sometimes they were permitted to sell or trade it. Bread, once again, slid between the rolls of ration and wage. And then, there's the fringe fact that makes you blink. There's evidence soldiers sometimes use bread as gambling stakes. Imagine a tense evening before a campaign. Warriors huddled around a makeshift game board, wagering the next morning's breakfast. All or muffin, one might say. Okay, not muffin, but you get the idea. The bread wasn't always dry and punishing. During peaceful seasons or victory feasts, soldiers received richer loaves, sweeter, softer, sometimes shaped like sacred symbols. These were celebratory, ceremonial, proof of a grateful pharaoh or a successful harvest. One day you're chewing cement, the next you're holding a delicate bun stamped with the ink. Historians still argue whether the military's bread supply was centralized, issued by scribes and quartermasters from royal bakeries, or more local, sourced from villages wherever the army passed. Either way, it meant one thing: wherever the Egyptian army went, bakers followed. Back in the village, you're invited to tag along with a small caravan headed toward a worksite near a limestone quarry. Not the Great Pyramids, no. Those days are past. But still, the scale is impressive. You arrive just in time to see workers lining up for their daily portions. There's no coin pouch here. No tally sheet either. Just a man with a reed pen and a basket of loaves. Each worker receives a different kind of bread depending on their job. Quarrymen, who spend the day hammering stone under the sun, get thick loaves rich in barley. Lighter-duty workers, porters, or tool sharpeners receive softer rolls. And then there's the hierarchy. Overseers get spiced bread, maybe a touch of honey if they've been in the pharaoh's good graces. There's a moment when you overhear 2 men arguing. One claims he's owed 3 loaves, not 2. The other says his count is correct. The first man slams a loaf to the ground, it splits in half, and there, pressed inside the dough, is a token. A tiny seal. This loaf was official. Issued. Valid. Counterfeit loaves were a real problem, especially in times of scarcity. You sit in the shade of a makeshift awning, watching a boy mold fresh dough into a long, snake-like coil. He wraps it into a spiral, pinching the ends into points, then presses a carved stick into the top, a makeshift seal. Bread wasn't just edible. It was functional. Stamped. Verified. Sometimes even baked with notes inside. That's the fringe bit for today, baked messages. It wasn't common, but a few unusual loaves have been found with small reeds or slips of papyrus tucked inside. Whether these were warnings, secret messages, or maybe just a shopping list gone astray, no one knows. The intrigue is delicious. As the workday closes, the workers shuffle back to their quarters. Tired, soot-covered, but clutching their bread like treasure. One man, clearly exhausted, sits beside you and sighs. Tomorrow, same dust, same bread. But he says it with a small smile. You walk a bit further along the edge of the quarry and spot a priest overseeing a different kind of bread delivery. This one's for the gods. An ox is led past, incense lit, and dozens of ritual loaves placed carefully on stone altars. They're shaped elaborately, some coiled like cobras, others layered to resemble lotus petals. A symbolic buffet for the divine. And you wonder, did anyone ever sneak a bite of the god's bread? Surely someone tried. And surely someone got caught. As the stars start appearing overhead, you return to the village with the caravan. The clatter of donkey carts, the murmur of tired voices, and that ever-present smell of bread fill the air. One of the caravan drivers offers you a roll. Payment, he says with a grin. You didn't do anything, but you accept it anyway. Back in your sleeping mat, under a fraying reed roof, you break the roll in half. Still warm. Inside, you spot a single dried fig pressed into the dough. Someone somewhere had decided you deserved a sweet surprise. And that's when it hits you again. In this world, bread isn't just food. It's message, status, salary, tribute, offering, and sometimes, if you're lucky, a little bit of kindness. You wake to the rhythmic thud of wooden paddles hitting clay ovens, the scent of scorched flour drifting into your nostrils before your eyes even open. Another day in Egypt, and of course, more bread. But today, you're not headed to a quarry, nor to a temple, nor even to the soldiers' camp. No, today you're going shopping. Imagine a bustling market street in Thebes or Memphis. Vendors shouting, donkeys braying, the jangle of copper tools against woven baskets. You dodge a goat, sidestep a man balancing clay pots on his head, and find yourself in front of a stall with the strangest price list you've ever seen. 1 egg equals half a roll. A small jug of beer? 1 full barley loaf. A live duck? 3 loaves plus a wedge of cheese. That's right. Today you're here to barter. But not with shiny coins, those are still centuries away from mainstream use in Egypt. Here, bread is currency, and your wallet is a linen sack filled with yesterday's best-baked offerings. The baker at the center of it all has a flour-dusted beard and a look of someone who's seen too many arguments over stale crusts. Fresh bread buys more, he tells you, slapping a steaming loaf on the table. But if it's hard enough to knock someone out, discount. You start to notice the nuance. Bread comes in dozens of shapes and sizes, each with its own bartering power. Long loaves for trade, round rolls for snacks, flat discs for wrapping herbs or dried fish. Some are hollowed out and stuffed, others scored on top with hash marks that seem to function like denomination symbols. A boy runs past you clutching what appears to be a small animal. It's a monkey, squirming and yipping. His friend shouts, "You'll never trade that for bread." The monkey, wisely, disagrees. Meanwhile, a woman next to you swaps a pair of sandals for 2 loaves and a slice of honeycomb. You realize you're hungry. But do you really want to spend your breakfast on, wait, what even is that? Fried locust skewers? You pass a spice stall and the merchant eyes your sack of bread. Want coriander? He asks. 2 loaves. You hesitate. 1.5 if it's hot, he adds, lifting a corner of your sack to inspect its contents like a customs agent sniffing for contraband. Historians still argue whether bread was officially pegged to a value system like weights of silver or measures of grain, or if its worth simply fluctuated like crypto depending on mood, heat, and how desperate your stomach was. What's clear is that bread wasn't just barter, it was reputation. If your loaves were light, moldy, or crumbly, word got around. Fringe fact of the day? There are records of counterfeit bread. That's right, some clever folks would shape mud or clay into loaf shapes, dust them with flour, and try to pass them off in the early morning rush. Others would bake with extra husks or sand to bulk out the weight. Apparently, biting into gravel was a real risk, though, hey, free dental exfoliation. Back in the market, you meet a woman who's practically royalty among the bread traders. Her loaves are fragrant with fenugreek and dotted with dates. She tells you that she uses a secret mix of river reeds and date palm ash to regulate oven temperature. Then she leans in and says, "Bread tells truth." You ask what she means, and she pulls out a particularly plump loaf. If it's honest, it feeds. If it's false, it breaks teeth. You buy it anyway. It smells amazing. As the sun climbs, the market begins to empty. Bread loaves vanish from tables and reappear in baskets, underarms, or tied to belts with twine. You notice scribes sitting nearby, noting the day's rates in long columns of hieroglyphs. One man pauses, scratches something out, and adjusts the trade value of garlic. Just like that, garlic becomes slightly more expensive and bread slightly more precious. You hear a low murmur and argument. Two men are fighting over a trade gone wrong. One claims he was given half a loaf too little in exchange for a linen wrap. A third person appears, the equivalent of a market judge. He takes both loaves, inspects their weight and moisture, and breaks one open. He smells it, nods, hands it back to its owner. "Yours was dry," he says. Case closed. It occurs to you that this market is less like a food court and more like a currency exchange. Bread isn't just nourishment. It's negotiation, it's leverage, it's identity. People bake their loaves with marks unique to their household. Slashes, dots, even symbols pressed with carved stones. One elderly vendor shows you a round loaf with a fish stamp, her family's emblem. 3 generations, she says. Our loaves always carried the Nile. In one corner of the market, you stumble on something curious. A bread ledger. It's not paper, it's a slab of limestone with etchings. Someone is recording trades, quantities, and transactions in pictographs. A man stands over it, chisel in hand, carefully updating the record like a grocery accountant. It's mesmerizing and possibly the earliest version of QuickBooks. By midday, the sun is unforgiving, and even the most energetic bread hawkers begin packing up. The air now smells more like warm stone and sweat than yeast and honey. You make one last trade. Your last soft roll for a tiny clay amulet shaped like a beetle. Scarab. Good luck, the merchant says. You leave the market lighter in bread but rich in stories. On your way back through the winding alleys, you hear a song drifting from a window. Children's voices. A lullaby about a baker and the goddess Hathor, protector of joy and drunkenness. The lyrics are silly, but you hum it anyway. When you return to your mat and lie back, you realize that what you witnessed today wasn't just commerce. It was culture. Bread as value. Bread as voice. Bread as proof you belonged here, even just for a while. The morning light filters softly through a woven reed screen as you stretch your legs and brush off a few stray crumbs from yesterday's market dealings. There's something quietly triumphant about surviving a full-blown bread-based economy with your teeth intact. Today, you're headed someplace less chaotic but no less fascinating, a bakery. Not your average rustic oven in the corner of a village, but one of the massive state-run bread workshops. Picture an industrial kitchen on a temple's payroll, churning out loaves not for taste, but for tribute. You arrive at a compound buzzing with activity. Rows of workers, men, women, even a few older children, tend dough, stoke fires, and shape the bread that fuels Egypt's entire bureaucracy. The noise is constant, the hollow thump of kneading, the rasp of grinding stones, the occasional cursing when someone drops a batch into ash. You get the feeling OSHA wouldn't be thrilled with the ventilation situation. This is the Temple Bakery, and it's no mom and pop affair. The state controls it, and its output isn't just for gods, though plenty does end up as temple offerings. It's also for laborers, soldiers, and scribes. The bread here is rationed, labeled, and sometimes even signed off by priests. If you want to be poetic, you could say the whole government is fueled by carbs. One baker, his arms streaked with flour and sweat, lets you peek into the operation. "This one's for RA," he says, motioning to a row of pyramid-shaped loaves. "Morning, batch." You watch as he carves a small sun disk into the dough before sliding it into the clay oven. "Keeps the gods in a good mood," he grins. Mainstream historians agree that temples in New Kingdom Egypt were among the largest employers and landowners, essentially running their own economies. Bread wasn't just a product, they managed its raw materials from field to flour. The wheat fields belonged to the temple. The workers were housed by the temple. Even the donkeys that carried sacks of grain to the mill? Temple donkeys. You begin to wonder if the gods were also responsible for daily HR meetings. Curious fact? Some workers were actually paid in beer, but since beer and bread were basically cousins made from similar ingredients and often interchanged, you could say they were just getting the liquid version of currency. Fermented finance. Tastes better than coins. You follow another worker to the grinding area where teams of women kneel in rhythmic unison using long stones to pulverize grain. It's dusty, repetitive, and known to wear down joints and teeth thanks to the fine grit that ends up in the flour. You shudder imagining your molars being slowly ground into history. Watch the toes, someone calls, just in time for you to hop out of the way as a baker hauls a smoking tray out of an oven. He plops it down and pries one loaf open with a stick. The smell is heavenly, nutty, warm, and slightly sour. But this batch isn't for eating. It's going straight to a ledger table. There, a scribe meticulously records each batch, tallies the loaves, checks the temple order. Sometimes he even stamps them with a seal pressed into the dough before baking. You peer at one such stamp, a falcon wings spread. Horus's batch. You suppress a laugh at the idea of divine gluten tracking. Still, this is serious business. The bread rations from this bakery may feed hundreds. There are quotas to hit, and every undercooked or cracked loaf could reflect poorly on the entire temple administration. Historians still argue whether these quotas functioned like taxes or mandatory temple service. What's clear is that it wasn't optional, this bread was due. There's a distinct hierarchy, even among loaves. The highest quality, decorated, honey-sweetened ones are for the gods or the priests, depending on who you ask. The mid-range, sturdy but edible, goes to skilled workers like masons or scribes. The lowest grade? Think hard, dry, possibly burnt. Perfect for laborers hauling limestone in the desert. Or possibly for building emergency walls if mortar runs out. You notice an odd moment when a group of bakers pause to consult a faded wall carving. It's a recipe. Not scribbled on papyrus or etched in clay, this one's immortalized in hieroglyphs on a limestone panel. A recipe passed down not by grandmothers but by decree. You try to read the symbols: barley, water, heat, wait, repeat. It's like reading ancient IKEA instructions, only stickier. Then, a quirky tidbit floats your way. A nearby baker swears he once made bread with fruit from a tamarisk tree soaked in beer and stirred with goat milk. My own invention, he says proudly. Had the scribes dancing sideways by noon. You nod politely. Inside, you're very glad you skipped breakfast. A bell rings, well, a gong of sorts, and the workers begin wrapping up trays in linen cloths. The bread is loaded onto carts pulled by oxen and hauled off toward the temple complex. A cloud of flour rises behind them like a soft fog, and for a moment, the whole bakery seems suspended in ritual. As you step outside, blinking in the bright sun, you realize you're coated in a thin layer of wheat dust. You smell like a crouton, but it's strangely comforting. In your linen pouch, you carry a small, still warm loaf handed to you by one of the bakers as you left. For luck, she said. Or dinner if the gods don't want it. You walk back along the mud brick streets, watching villagers greet the bread carts with open arms. Some offer small tokens, flowers, bits of polished stone, even stories and thanks. The carts rumble past, leaving behind not just nourishment, but something far weightier, the feeling of shared survival. Later, as dusk gathers, you sit by a canal and tear open your gifted loaf. It's dense, mildly sweet, and oddly crunchy, possibly from a few stray husks. But it's good. Better than good. It tastes like history. You chew slowly, eyes on the rippling water, listening to frogs and distant temple drums. You begin to see why bread mattered so much. It wasn't just something you ate. It was labor, status, economy, ritual, culture. A symbol baked into every brick of this civilization's foundations. You take another bite and feel full, not just in the stomach, but in the spirit. A new day presses its warmth against the Nile, and you're waking up on a thin mat in a workman's village, not some bustling city center, but a dusty grid of simple mud brick houses on the edge of the desert. There's no grand columned hall here, just the rising clatter of everyday life. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and glance at the bread wrapped in linen beside you. Breakfast? Or currency? Or both? It's still hard to tell. This village isn't just anywhere, it's a place like Deir el Medina, a workers' settlement dedicated to building royal tombs. The air smells faintly of ash and warm grain. You wander out into the narrow alleys, watching artisans sip beer and chew on crusts as they gather tools. The bread here isn't decorative or symbolic. It's rations, wages, life. You notice that each household seems to track their daily bread payments, charred marks on plaster walls, scratched symbols on pots. One elderly woman even shows you a bread receipt scratched into a shard of pottery. She smirks, pats your arm and tells you, "If the bread doesn't show up, neither does my husband." And there's the key. Bread distribution was tightly linked to labor management. Archaeologists have uncovered meticulous records showing which workers received how much bread and when. Miss a day on the job? You get less. Have a child born? Slight increase in the household allotment. It's HR ancient Egyptian style, no memos, just loaves. Mainstream historians are pretty unanimous about this. The state and temple authorities used bread as structured compensation. It wasn't just a casual reward. It was the system. In fact, some scholars argue that bread provided more stability than metal coins ever could. After all, you can't eat silver. But here's a quirkier piece. Some of the bread was shaped for function as much as flavor. You spot a man carrying a long, rod-like loaf, meant not for eating but measuring. These bread rods were used in ceremonial offerings and architecture alike. Imagine a world where a yardstick is both your ruler and your lunch. That's multitasking. Back in the village, a young boy offers to show you his father's bread stash. You expect a pantry. Instead, he points under a floor tile. Together, you lift it to find a small chamber lined with straw and filled with hardened loaves, carefully preserved and dated. Emergency rations? Tax evasion? Or a hedge against grain prices rising? Historians still debate why so many households kept secret hoards. Some say fear of famine. Others suggest bread had started to blur with wealth itself. You step into a communal meeting space, less a town hall, more a shaded courtyard with low benches and cracked jugs of beer. Elders are already seated, sipping slowly and breaking apart loaves as they talk business. The topic? Delayed wages. One man bangs his fist, demanding the temple send their ration allotments on time. We're builders of kings, he growls, not beggars. There's murmuring agreement punctuated by bites of barley bread. It's hard not to chuckle at the image, an entire labor negotiation fueled by carbs. But this really happened. Historical records from Deir el-Medina describe strikes, actual labor protests, when workers weren't paid their daily bread and beer. Peaceful but firm, these strikes may have been among the earliest in history. And at their core? Missing lunch. Nearby, two women kneel beside a grinding stone. They work in sync, arms moving rhythmically, mouths occasionally bursting into song. The lyrics are teasing, half-mocking odes to stingy scribes and lazy overseers. You catch a line about bread baked with spite and nearly laugh out loud. Seems sarcasm is a timeless currency too. One woman, noticing your curiosity, tosses you a tiny loaf, barely bigger than your palm. For your journey, she says. Don't sell it. It's a joke. Turns out, joke bread was a thing. Mini loaves were sometimes baked as toys, offerings, or satire. Little edible sculptures that played with the boundaries between food, art, and expression. Later, you're invited to join a household for their evening meal. It's modest bread, lentils, a few dried figs. But what's fascinating is how the bread itself is used. One thick, flat round serves as a communal plate, catching drips and crumbs. Others are folded like wallets around fillings. It's not just food. It's cutlery, table, and currency in one. The family's eldest son recounts how, once, he traded a week's ration of sweetened bread to secure a bronze chisel. Worth every bite, he says, lifting the tool like a trophy. You marvel at the fluidity, how the society allowed bread to morph across roles. Payment, offering, bartering chip, artistic medium. It was as flexible as dough itself. Outside, under a thick sky turning purple with evening, you watch workers return from the valley. Their faces are dusty, sunburned, tired, but every one of them clutches a sack, or a bundle, or a tightly tied linen wrap. Inside, their daily wage, bread. It strikes you again just how profoundly this humble food permeated life. It wasn't symbolic in the abstract. It was literal survival, measured, baked, traded, and sometimes fought for. You imagine your own life translated into loaves, rent as 50 flatbreads, dinner as 3 crumbed rolls, savings as a secret cache of honey-laced cakes in your closet. You sit back against the mud brick wall, warm loaf in your hand, listening to the wind. There's a peace in this village rhythm, a quiet logic to its flour and fire economy. You feel part of it now, not just an observer, but a participant in the daily weighing, baking, and sharing of worth. As the stars blink into the darkening sky, you take one last bite. The bread is chewy, smoky, slightly sour, but honest. A loaf with nothing to prove. You wake the next morning to the scratchy music of donkeys braying and someone, possibly two someones, arguing about the price of onions. Your bed of straw is less straw than sand at this point, and your back lets you know it. Still, there's something comforting about the smell of warm grain baking in clay ovens nearby. It's like the entire world has been slow roasted overnight. You stretch, step outside, and watch the village slowly come alive. And right there, across the way, is the bakery. This isn't a hipster bakery with cinnamon rolls and gluten-free croissants. No, this is an industrial-scale breadworks facility. The bakery in an ancient Egyptian village wasn't a side hustle. It was the beating heart of the economy. A dozen workers move with practiced speed. Someone pours flour into a massive basin. Someone else stirs with a stick the size of your forearm. And farther down, a man with calloused hands slaps dough onto the inside of a hot, dome-shaped oven. You can actually hear the hiss of raw dough turning solid. You watch as baskets of finished loaves are loaded up for delivery, not to homes, but to the village accountant. The bread isn't just being baked to eat. It's being baked to distribute, to pay, to settle scores. One of the bakers, a wiry man with flour in his eyebrows, waves you over and hands you a peculiar loaf, tall, with a bulging belly and pointy tip. Standard issue, he says proudly. This one is a jet bread, one of the iconic shapes used for offerings and, quite often, as a base measure of value. A bit like saying, that'll be 2 jets worth of linen, thanks. Historians widely agree that jet breads weren't just symbolic, they had real, assigned value. A consistent shape meant consistent tradability. You're essentially holding an edible unit of economic stability. Imagine if your grocery store accepted sourdough slices instead of coins. Just don't show up with rye. Too crumbly. In the corner, 2 younger bakers debate whether to include emmer or barley in the next batch. Emmer tastes better, one argues. But barley lasts longer in storage, the other counters. You smile, realizing this is essentially a business meeting. Flour politics at its finest. And here's a fringe fact you weren't expecting. Some scholars suggest that special yeast starters were guarded and passed down like heirlooms. A particularly productive fermentation batch could make or break a family's fortune. One clay jar of ancient yeast, carefully tended, stored, and shared, was both a recipe and a legacy. You think of today's sourdough moms and feel oddly connected across the millennia. A bit later, you wander toward the village scribe's quarters. This man isn't a baker or a farmer. He's a numbers guy. Sitting beneath a canopy of reeds, he scrawls figures onto sheets of papyrus with a reed pen and ink made from crushed carbon. You watch him record today's bread output, number of loaves, size classifications, destination recipients. You half expect him to say, just circling back on that inventory doc, but instead he just grunts and keeps writing. He shows you a scroll filled with transactions: bread traded for cloth, bread traded for cattle feed, bread deducted for absenteeism. It's a full-blown ledger, the kind an auditor might lose sleep over. Some of the notations are color-coded. Some are marked with little drawings of loaves with dots on them. Marks quality, the scribe explains. Too many dots means it's dry. We give those to the temple guards. This is where things start to feel like a surreal accounting dream. Bread is everywhere, but it's not all equal. There's temple bread baked with fine emmer flour and honey, often never eaten. There's daily ration bread, nutritious but bland. And then there's surplus bread used for trade, offering, or emergency rations. The scribes track them all. Your head spins slightly at the dough-based bureaucracy. Later, you're pulled aside by a traveling merchant who offers to trade you a pair of sandals for one of your loaves. You hesitate, are these the good sandals or the ones with the questionable stitching? The merchant grins and throws in a stick of coal eyeliner. Deal. Bread bartering wasn't rare. In fact, historians still argue whether structured currencies like metal weights ever fully replaced barter systems in ancient Egypt. Many believe the two ran in parallel: formal record-keeping by scribes for official wages and informal trades among villagers using bread, beer, or even dried fish. That night, as the desert air cools and the sky melts into velvet, you find yourself at a small fire outside the bakery. Workers and scribes alike are seated in a wide circle, loaves passed from hand to hand. One man tells a story about a flood year when the granaries were slow to open. "We made bread from crushed acacia seeds," he says. "Tasted like punishment." Another woman laughs, saying she once saw a priest accept a bride price that included 20 ceremonial loaves, each shaped like a crocodile. "He ate the tails first," she says. "Said it was good luck." You notice that bread is more than just food here. It's humor, memory, ritual. a medium for everything from negotiation to superstition. Someone hands you a small, flat loaf shaped like a scarab beetle. Protects you from paperwork, they joke. You tuck it into your satchel just in case. As the flames die down and the group begins to hum a low, sleepy tune, you nibble at the edge of a fresh-baked round. It's chewy and warm, with a crust just crisp enough to remind you someone cared when they made it. Bread here is love disguised as logistics. And lying under the stars, belly full and mind spinning, you begin to wonder, what if modern currency was this honest? What if instead of numbers on a screen, we exchanged something made by hand, shared in community, and valued with every bite? It's a question that follows you into dreams, where accountants bake and bakers balance ledgers, and every transaction ends with the satisfying crackle of crust. By now, you've become something of a local curiosity. People nod when you pass, a few kids trail behind you like you're the village's strange new pet, and someone even offers to trade you a necklace of dried dates for your sandals. You politely decline. The sand here is less warm and soft and more molten cheese grater. Your morning starts with a visit to the granary. It looms at the edge of the village, squat and sunbaked, shaped like a giant mud brick caterpillar. You step inside and are immediately hit by the dry, yeasty aroma of stored grain. Stacks of sacks, barley, emmer wheat, even some fava beans sit under the watchful eye of two record keepers with arms crossed and expressions that say, "No, you may not take a souvenir." One of them shows you how they calculate rations. It's surprisingly precise. A laborer receives a set amount of grain based on their role, rank, and workload. That grain is then turned into beer and bread, often by the same family members who harvest it. It's like being paid in flour and then asked to bake your own paycheck. You ask about storage, and that's when they bring you to a chamber kept mysteriously cool. Inside are several tall clay silos sealed with plaster lids. These are the grain reserves, the emergency backup system of the ancient world. For famine, or war, or very bad parties, one record keeper jokes. Historians still argue whether the granary was strictly a state operation or if it functioned more like a community-run co-op with temple oversight. Some say taxes went straight into state-run storage, while others believe locals had more say in how grain was distributed during lean years. Either way, it's clear that grain wasn't just food, it was policy. The granary was the treasury, the bank vault, the insurance policy, and the village gossip mill all rolled into one. You move on to the workers' quarters, where you're greeted by the rhythmic thump of grinding stones. Two women, seated on woven mats, work side by side. One pours grain into a sloped quern while the other crushes it with a long, flat stone. It's repetitive, dusty work, and it explains the sand-like texture of most ancient bread. It's extra minerals, one woman says, winking. Good for the teeth. Fun fact, archaeologists have found ancient Egyptian skeletons with severely worn-down molars, not from sugar, but from decades of eating bread laced with grit from grinding stones. Your modern dentist would cry. You're handed a piece of coarse, triangular flatbread and warned, don't chew it like you hate it. You nibble cautiously. It's dense, dry, and tastes faintly of roasted grass. But you smile like it's a croissant because these women are armed with rolling pins and you're not taking chances. Later in the day, you're invited to a special ritual outside the temple complex. A line of workers, scribes, and priests gather under a sunshade, each holding elaborately shaped loaves. Some spiral, others stacked like tiny pyramids, one even shaped like an egg. These aren't for dinner, these are offering breads. In a hushed ceremony, the breads are laid before statues of the gods, accompanied by chants and the burning of incense. The high priest steps forward, raising a golden ladle of barley beer. To feed the Ka, he says solemnly. The Ka, you remember, is the spiritual double that lives on after death. And apparently it still gets hungry. Some of the offering loaves will be left to rot, a gift to the divine. Others will be redistributed to temple workers, a perk of working in the godly food chain. You wonder how often someone accidentally eats the bread before it's blessed. Probably more than they admit. And here's a delightful fringe detail. There's a myth about a temple cat who once interrupted a ceremony by stealing a sacred loaf shaped like the moon. The priest declared it a divine sign. The gods are hungry, he said, and from that day on, cats were allowed at the altars. Or so the story goes. You look around, half expecting a whiskered deity to make a cameo. No luck. That night, you sit near a small canal with an old fisherman who offers you a slice of his personal favorite, a fermented bread stuffed with dates and tiny salted fish. Best paired with beer, he says. You take a cautious bite. It's sweet, salty, and vaguely alarming. like a pastry having an identity crisis. Still, you finish it because the man's smile tells you he's proud of this culinary curiosity. You ask him what he uses as currency when he trades. Mostly bread, he says, but sometimes my wife's pickled onions. Worth more than gold on a hot day. You think back to all the places you've seen bread exchanged, in bakeries, in fields, in temples, at weddings, even in arguments. It's not just a commodity, it's an instrument of connection. Each loaf carries weight, not just physically but socially. Who made it, how fresh it is, what shape it takes, these things matter. Bread here is personality, status, economy, and religion in crusty form. And this is the quiet magic of it all, in a world without coins jangling in pockets where no one swipes a card or taps a screen, people still find value. They still trade, calculate, haggle, and hope. And in the middle of all that complexity, they bake. You lie down that evening next to the granary wall, warm from the sun and radiating a faint yeasty scent. Stars peek out above, indifferent but twinkling. You think about the women grinding flour by hand, the scribes with their bread-shaped math, the priests honoring gods with loaves too pretty to eat. And just before sleep takes you, one final thought rises. In this land of gold and stone, bread is what actually keeps people going. Bread, not wealth. Bread, not monuments. Bread and the people who make it. The next day, you wake to the smell of baking bread again. It's everywhere. But this morning's batch smells different. You follow your nose through a winding alley of mud brick homes and sun-bleached laundry until you reach a square crowded with loaves cooling on mats. They aren't the hard, triangular flatbreads you've grown used to. These are puffy, golden, even festive. Today is a feast day. You're told this with a mix of excitement and dread by a young boy tugging at his linen tunic and pointing toward the temple. Big feast. Too much food. Too much dancing. My feet will fall off. You pat his head and nod solemnly. You've been to enough family weddings to know the feeling. Feast days in ancient Egypt are more than just excuses to eat too much. They're social glue where bread takes on ceremonial importance. As you watch preparations unfold, the marketplace transforms into a performance. Loaves are stacked in towering pyramids, some dyed with saffron, others speckled with herbs and flowers. Bakers move with the speed and confidence of seasoned artists. One even sculpts a loaf into the shape of a falcon in homage to Horus, perhaps, or maybe just showing off. You sneak a taste of a honey-dipped pastry that someone calls the good kind we only make when the gods are watching. It sticks to your teeth and lingers like sunshine. Soon, the musicians arrive, harps, lutes, hand drums, and people begin to gather in the temple courtyard. You notice something funny. No one's carrying gold or jewels or even tools. They're bringing loaves. Big ones, small ones, shaped ones. You ask someone if this is just a traditional thing. Oh no, she says, this is payment. For food, for favors, for dancing lessons if you're bad enough. It's a barter economy but with a twist. Bread is the ticket in. You can buy a service, rent a donkey, or bribe a guard nicely with the right loaf. Historians still debate how formal this system was, whether people had fixed values for loaves based on weight or ingredients, or if it was more casual, a matter of local custom and clever negotiation. But here's the quirky part. There's evidence that different shapes of bread meant different things. Circular loaves might symbolize unity or rebirth. Spiral loaves were offerings for the afterlife. And the really big ones? Reserved for temple priests and tax collectors. Because nothing says you owe me like a 5-pound egg-shaped sourdough. You find yourself swept into the celebration, drifting between dancers and priests, merchants and children. A man offers you a job, 1 hour of helping set up reed benches in exchange for a hearty portion of lentil stew and a nutty barley loaf. You agree, because that's how things work here. Your muscles are currency. Your time is a commodity. And your reward is food. Later, you watch a play reenacting the myth of Osiris and Set, where the evil brother traps the god of the underworld in a giant coffin. But in this version, the coffin is a huge bread box. Everyone laughs. A woman beside you whispers, "The gods don't mind if we get silly sometimes." You make your way toward the banks of the Nile as dusk falls. Families gather in tight circles, passing around food, lighting oil lamps, and telling stories. One old man grins as he tears off a piece of spiced bread and points at the stars. They say the Milky Way is a spilled bowl of flour. That's why the gods keep sending us wheat. You chuckle, but it sticks with you, because somewhere between the songs and the stories, it hits you. This isn't just a party. It's a social recalibration. Every feast resets the balance. Redistributing food, labor, laughter, and lore. People pay debts, forgive slights, make new alliances, all with bread as the unspoken contract. You talk to a brewer who tells you he accepts only certain loaves as payment. Dense ones, he says, because light ones are full of air and lies. There's something deeply comforting about the logic of it. Bread isn't abstract like coins or digital numbers. You can't inflate it. You can't fake it. If someone tries to pay you with a burnt lump of barley, you'll know. And you'll scowl appropriately. You also learn that children often practice math using bread counting problems. A common school exercise goes something like, if Neferti gives 4 loaves to her mother and receives 2 loaves from her brother, how many loaves does she have before she gets scolded for hoarding? Math, but make it edible. Fringe fact of the day, there's a preserved papyrus in the British Museum with a scribbled margin note from a student that says, essentially, this problem is stupid. No one would give away that much bread. Ancient sass lives on. As night deepens, the music slows. People lie back on woven mats, bellies full, surrounded by half-finished loaves and snoozing children. You sit near the fire with a young priest who tells you bread can carry prayers. You need your thoughts into the dough, she says. Then when it's baked, the smoke carries your message. You ask what happens if the bread burns. She shrugs. Then the gods were probably busy. And once again, you're struck by the duality of it all. Bread is sacred and practical. It's a prayer and a paycheck. It fills bellies and builds temples. You take a small, spiral-shaped loaf from the pile beside you. It's warm in your hands, still soft. You break it in 2, give half to the sleepy child beside you, and chew your piece slowly. Somewhere behind you, someone starts humming. Not a song, you know, but something with an ancient lilt that sounds like the Nile itself might be humming along. And you think, this is what wealth looks like. Not glittering coins or high walls, but people sharing a loaf under the stars, wrapped in music, stories, and trust. By the time the stars fade into the hazy dawn, you've been dreaming of bread again. Not metaphorically, literal dreams. Loaves walking on stubby legs, chanting equations, handing you receipts written in barley crumbs. Maybe you finally inhaled too much baking smoke. Or maybe you think with a smirk, this is just what economic theory feels like when you're lying on woven mats instead of in a classroom. You stretch, blink, and find yourself back in the workshop district, this time following the scent of flour and ink. You're in a scribe's house now, watching him prepare tax records. No coins. No scales. Just lines and lines of tiny pictures, loaves, jugs, cattle, fish. It's a visual language of value, drawn in careful rows that might as well be ancient spreadsheets. He shows you a chart. 1 laborer equals 3 loaves per day. 1 priest equals 10 loaves. 1 government inspector equals more than you'd think, considering how often they just drop by. You raise an eyebrow and he chuckles. We say inspectors have hollow legs and no shame. This is where things get tricky. The idea that bread is currency sounds charming, homey even. But the bureaucracy behind it? Oh, it's real. Egypt had full-scale accounting systems that tracked who owed what to whom. And yes, it was often all measured in loaves. Take a deep breath, because here comes the mainstream fact. Egypt's state economy was deeply centralized. Grain taxes were collected from farmers, stored in massive granaries, and then redistributed to pay workers, soldiers, temple staff, and royal projects. In this model, the state was the bakery and the people were both its customers and its workforce. But here's the twisty, lesser-known bit: the bread payments weren't always literal. Sometimes you owed loaves in tax, but paid in labor or even beer. Historians still argue whether this counts as a symbolic economy or a fully-fledged non-monetary system. You just think it sounds like ancient Egypt was playing the world's longest-running barter-based video game. And it worked most of the time, until a flood came too low or too high, until rats chewed through the grain reserves, until the bread spoiled or got stolen. Then the whole system went wobbly, like a 3-legged table on uneven mud brick flooring. But for now, you sit beside the scribe and watch him record a shipment of bread to the embalming team at the necropolis. The dead don't eat, he says, but the people preparing them sure do. He scratches behind his ear with the end of his reed brush. I always wonder, if a loaf is shaped like a god's eye, does it taste more powerful? You shrug. Only one way to find out, really. Later that day, you join a caravan heading toward a construction site, some temple renovation halfway across the city. The workers are singing, not because they're especially cheerful, but because the foreman pays extra in loaves if you keep the tempo. You try to join in, terribly off-key, and receive a half-loaf of pity bread for your effort. It's chewy, but oddly satisfying. A mason shows you his pouch, 2 loaves, a dried fish, and a lump of honey. My week's wages, he says proudly. 1 for home. 1 for me. Fish is for the dog. Honey's for the wife. A pause. She likes me sweet when I'm late. As the day rolls on, you start to see how versatile bread-based wages really are. Workers get paid in loaves, then trade those loaves for thread, pottery, favors. Bakers accept raw barley from farmers and return bread as payment, minus a baking fee, of course. Even the local healer accepts a certain number of loaves for salves and consultations. You meet a young woman fixing sandals in a shaded stall. Her fee? 1 loaf per pair. 2 if you want the good stitching, she says, tapping the edge of your worn-out shoe with her awl. Or I could take 1 now and the second after you test the fit. A short pause. Unless your walk is weird. Then we renegotiate. She smiles. You hand her a loaf and suddenly you feel like you've just paid your Netflix subscription with carbs. Curiously, some loaves have marks pressed into the dough before baking, accounting stamps of a sort. This one has a cartouche, a small royal emblem that indicates it came from temple rations. Another bears the mark of a specific noble estate. These marks not only denote origin but help prevent fraud. You imagine a black market loaf operation and can't help but giggle. Ancient Egypt, home of the counterfeit ciabatta. There's also word of inspectors, those legendary hollow-legged officials who audit bakery output. You see one pacing near the granary, hands behind his back, muttering, "Too small. Too light. Underbaked." He pokes a nearby apprentice in the chest and bellows, "Do you think RA eats crumbs?" You decide not to introduce yourself. And here's a wonderfully weird fact. Some granaries had professional sniffers whose job was literally to smell for mold or pests. Because no one wants to pay taxes in sour bread. That's where economic policy meets a very human nose. Even stranger, some historians believe there were ritual bakers whose bread was never meant to be eaten, just offered, counted, and burned. Imagine working all day on intricate loaves just to watch them go up in smoke. You picture one of these bakers sighing deeply as yet another perfectly golden creation gets tossed into the ceremonial flame. There goes my best crust again. But it all fits into the rhythm of life. The state taxed bread to fund temples. The temples blessed bread to feed workers. The workers earned bread to raise families. And you? You're just a wandering observer, slowly realizing that an economy without coins isn't a primitive failure, it's an intricate, breathing organism. Alive in every kneaded dough and bartered trade. As the sun sets behind the reed-roofed houses, the city glows gold. Bread ovens still blaze. Children chase each other with half-eaten loaves clutched like trophies. A priest walks by, tucking a bundle of flatbreads under his arm like sacred scrolls. You lean against a crumbling wall, a small, olive-stuffed loaf in hand, and watch this ancient economy hum with life. No coins. No credit cards. Just trust, flour, and fire. And in a weird way, it makes you feel full. Not just from the carbs, but from the odd, comforting idea that real value, can be held in your hands, shared, broken, and remade every day. You're up early today, earlier than you'd like. The city isn't awake yet, but the bread ovens are. Always the bread ovens. Their warm breath floats through the air in sleepy huffs, mingling with the distant bray of donkeys and the shuffle of bare feet on stone. You're tagging along with a group of farmers this morning, jostling along a dusty path lined with palms and fields that stretch like sun-kissed carpets. They're hauling sacks of barley toward the granary, and as one of them helpfully points out, this is how we pay our debts, feed our gods, and impress our in-laws. You nod, not entirely sure which of those he's joking about. He offers you a handful of barley. It's rough, dry, earthy. He says, This is bread in disguise. You smile and tuck it in your pouch. The granary looms ahead, a squat stone building with narrow windows and thick walls. Inside, workers are already heaving sacks, measuring grain, recording tallies on wooden tablets. The air is thick with dust and determination. Here, you witness the backbone of the system, raw grain as proto-money. Before it becomes loaves or beer or scribbled calculations, it's this: sun-hardened kernels, exchanged, weighed, recorded, and locked away like treasure. A foreman with a shaved head and no-nonsense sandals explains, every farmer owes a quota. Flood too low? You owe anyway. Flood too high? Still owe. If you want pity, talk to the priests. There's a moment where you wonder how fair this really was. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian taxation system was balanced or deeply oppressive. Was it a stable backbone for civilization or a grain-based version of squeezing blood from a stone? The farmers don't seem resentful, though. This is just how things work. You give, you get. You hope the scribes do their math right and don't misplace your name in the wrong column. Nearby, a woman measures grain with a wooden scoop, muttering something about her son's wedding and how she's saving up enough barley to throw a feast and maybe hire a musician who knows more than 3 songs. She flashes a grin. If I offer the priest a honey cake, he might pretend my daughter's suitor is respectable. You offer her one of your barley kernels. She laughs and tosses it in the air. What's fascinating is how far this barley economy stretches. You visit a river dock where small boats are unloading grain shipments destined for other provinces. You learn that these aren't just local trades. Egyptian grain was exported as tribute, trade, and diplomacy. Bread wasn't just food, it was foreign policy. A boatman tells you with evident pride that one shipment of barley fed 100 soldiers in a neighboring province. And we only had to pay 2 stonemasons and a goat to ferry it upriver, he boasts. You blink. You think the goat might be the real winner in this deal. A little later, you find yourself at a small village festival celebrating the end of harvest. Bread is everywhere: flatbreads, honey loaves, braided rounds stuffed with dates and nuts. You lose count after 12 different varieties. You're chewing on something sticky and spicy when a storyteller steps up to a raised platform. He launches into a tale about a cunning baker who tricked the gods into blessing his oven by hiding prayers inside loaves. Every time you bite bread, he says, you're chewing a little piece of heaven. Someone in the crowd burps approvingly. You lean back and listen. The story takes a strange turn involving a haunted oven, a cat that speaks riddles, and a priest who mistakes a breadbasket for a divine sign. The details are fuzzy, but the moral is clear: bread is powerful and possibly dangerous in the wrong hands. Afterward, an elder whispers a bit of lore in your ear. Some households kept bread charms, tiny loaves marked with symbols meant to protect the home from illness or bad harvests. She presses one into your palm. It's hard, dense, and smells faintly of anise. Keep this near your heart, she says. Or at least near your stomach. By now, you're realizing that in ancient Egypt, bread was everywhere. It wasn't just sustenance, it was ceremony, currency, gossip, bargaining chip, love letter, and threat. You wander into a small schoolroom where a teacher is quizzing students on math problems using loaves as units. If one worker earns 3 loaves a day, how many does he have after 4 days minus 1 afternoon off to 10 goats? A boy raises his hand and confidently answers, 12 minus 2 goat loaves. The teacher nods solemnly as if this makes perfect sense. Later, you pass a young couple arguing over their household bread budget. You promised 2 loaves for my mother, the woman says. And you used them on fig pastries for your brother. The man sighs, points at his half-eaten pastry, and mutters, at least he shared. You smile. Bread disputes are eternal, apparently. You sit beneath a tamarisk tree as the day fades. Someone hands you a small triangular loaf, still warm. You break it in half and share it with a curious monkey who's been tailing you since midday. He seems to approve. You marvel at how seamlessly bread threads through every layer of life. From divine offering to daily argument, from temple feast to tax burden. It's humble and sacred, ordinary and extraordinary. A flat circle that somehow holds the shape of a civilization. And maybe, just maybe, in this world of pyramids and pharaohs, grain boats and scribe scrolls, the truest monument to Egyptian ingenuity is this. The simple act of turning sunlight into barley, barley into bread, and bread into meaning. You exhale. It's been a long day. Your sandals are dusty, your mind is full, and your satchel now contains 6 types of bread, a lucky charm, and possibly a very judgmental monkey. And you think, this might be the best economy you've ever tasted. You wake to the smell of ash and yeast again. It's been your steady companion through this entire journey, and now it greets you like an old friend, comforting and ever-present. Today's stroll takes you toward one of the more curious corners of the Egyptian economy, not just where bread gets eaten or traded, but where it's used to track labor, reward loyalty, and measure punishment. Yep, we're diving into the ancient world of work perks, ration plans, and weird HR policies, Pharaonic edition. You start your day at a bustling construction site on the edge of a stone quarry. The sound of chisels clinking, men shouting, and carts creaking fills the air. It's a controlled chaos, all in the name of monuments. And guess what keeps this enormous workforce humming along? Bread. You approach a scribe seated beneath a sun-faded awning. He's cross-legged, surrounded by reed pens and scrolls, scratching notes faster than you'd expect for someone who looks like he hasn't slept since the last dynasty. You ask what he's writing. He replies, not even glancing up, ration logs. Every single laborer gets their due daily allocations of bread, beer, onions, maybe some fish if they're lucky. This isn't charity. This is payroll. In loaves. He tilts a scroll your way. You see neat rows listing workers' names, job roles, and how much bread they're owed. 3 loaves for the stone haulers, 5 for the chiselers, 1 extra if the flood's early, he says. Unless your cousin steals your lunch, in which case he shrugs, tough. You wander past the workers. A shirtless man covered in limestone dust grins and holds up his lunch, a flatbread wrapped around pickled vegetables. Better than gold, he jokes, then takes a big bite and gets right back to swinging his mallet. What's wild is how organized all of this is. The Egyptians weren't just tossing bread out like party favors. Every loaf had a purpose, a schedule, a unit value. They even used specific types of bread for certain jobs. Fine wheat loaves for artisans, rough barley for field hands, dense travel bread for couriers and soldiers. This wasn't just lunch, it was bureaucracy in edible form. You sit down beside a group of cooks baking bread right on site. Their oven is a giant clay dome and they slide paddle after paddle of dough inside with practiced ease. One cook lets you shape a lump of barley dough. Yours comes out shaped like a lopsided fish. He doesn't judge you too much. One woman, elbow deep in flour, explains the pecking order. The more skilled your hands, the better your loaf. If you mess up, you're eating the burnt ones. Or worse, making them for someone who matters. Burnt bread was more than just disappointing. In some cases, it was a punishment. Officials could dock a man's rations, cut his bread supply, or give him poor-quality loaves as a form of disciplinary action. Ancient HR was absolutely savage. And yet, bread wasn't only a reward or punishment. It was symbolic, too. You hear about bread tokens, small clay or wood pieces marked with a symbol representing a specific allotment. Workers would collect them and turn them in for actual food. Like a punch card made of carbs. As you travel next to a military outpost, you see this token system in action. Soldiers line up before a stern-looking officer who hands out round tokens with bird symbols carved in. 2 tokens means you get rations for your donkey. 2. One guard tells you proudly, patting his very uninterested donkey. You ask if the tokens ever get forged. He grins. Once. Then the forger had to work a week without bread. Never tried again. You nod. Bread crimes apparently come with bread consequences. At a dusty rest stop near a canal, you meet a group of traveling scribes. They're swapping stories and bread recipes, as one does after a long walk through scorching fields. One scribe pulls a folded cloth from his satchel and unwraps a triangular loaf with a design pressed into the crust, a kind of edible signature. This, he says with reverence, is temple bread, baked for scribes like us. Symbolic, expensive, mostly air. You ask if it tastes good. He hesitates. It tastes righteous, then adds and slightly of ash. You thank him for the bite and quietly decide not to finish it. Later, you arrive at a work camp near a dam construction site. The men are clearly exhausted, slumped in the shade of stacked stones, waiting for their bread delivery like it's the highlight of their week. Which, to be fair, it probably is. A young foreman tells you, if you show up late 3 days in a row, they cut your bread by 1/3. But if you finish your section ahead of time, extra loaf, with dates. He says this like he's describing a 5-star reward package. Historians still argue whether these laborers were voluntary workers or state-controlled laborers living just one soggy loaf away from starvation. Some believe many of them were paid craftsmen, proud of their roles in building the kingdom's grandeur. Others argue it was barely disguised conscription. The line is, like much in Egyptian history, blurry and worn. You move on to a festival ground. Yes, again, the Egyptians loved a good excuse to eat bread and dance. This one celebrates a successful canal project. There's drumming, chanting, and pyramids of bread being handed out to everyone. Even children get miniature loaves shaped like ducks. A priest blesses the loaves before distribution. You lean in to hear his words. May this bread remind us of the sweat that built the land and the hands that shaped the river. It's oddly touching. By the end of the day, you're sitting beside an exhausted builder named Seti. He's got a clay cup of beer in one hand and a roasted onion in the other. You offer him half of your fig loaf. He smiles, tears it in half, and shares it with a stray dog that's been nosing around. This is the good stuff, he says. Tastes like payday. As twilight settles over the desert, you're left thinking about the strangeness of this world, where bread isn't just food, it's structure, it's policy, it's identity. You wonder what modern HR departments would look like if they paid in sourdough instead of salary. You decide it would definitely be more satisfying if a bit crummy. Supposed to be a sleepy historical journey. You groan, stretch, and shuffle outside the mud brick shelter where you dozed off with half a loaf tucked under your arm like a carb-based teddy bear. The air is cool and faintly sweet, with the smell of morning bread baking somewhere down the street. It's market day in this ancient village, and for once, you're not visiting a temple or labor site. Today, you're headed into the delicious chaos of everyday barter, gossip, and dough-based economics in action. The marketplace is already buzzing. Vendors call out prices, children chase goats, and someone tries to sell you a very suspicious dried fish on a stick. You politely decline. A woman with arms full of flatbread hurries past, shouting something about her neighbor underpaying for lentils. You follow her to a stall where transactions are flying like hot pitas. Literally, one nearly smacks you in the face. Welcome to the world of informal bread currency. It's messy, local, emotional, and very much alive. Here, bread isn't backed by a central authority or recorded by scribes, it's a social contract. You help your neighbor thresh wheat, she gives you a loaf. You trade a honey-smeared roll for a day's help herding ducks. That kind of thing. No paperwork, just bread. You chat with a grandmother who runs a small bread stand. She explains that everyone around here knows the value of her loaves. 1 for a basket of garlic, 2 for a linen rag, 3 if I add dates, she says, holding up a sticky, golden brown masterpiece that makes your stomach growl. She smiles. Unless you're family. Then you get 1 free and 1 with guilt. People come and go, swapping bread for everything. Hair braiding, basket repair, even relationship advice. You hear someone mutter, he gave her a sesame bun, must be serious. One young man offers to show you his bread ledger. You expect a papyrus scroll. Instead, he holds up a short stick with notches carved into it. Each line is a loaf I owe my cousin. He's letting me borrow his goat cart. He shrugs. I pay him back in rye. You ask what happens if he doesn't. He pauses. Then I get the bad yeast rumors spread about me. No one trades with a moldy man. That's the thing, you realize that while formal bakeries, temples, and work sites operate on schedules and tokens, these neighborhood bread economies run on reputation. Trust, kindness, and really good crusts. You drift toward a side alley where a man is making bread charms. Small loaves shaped like eyes, cats, or protective amulets. People buy them for luck, he says, placing a cat-shaped loaf on a small shrine, and sometimes as apologies. Turns out bread was often used to mend relationships. Forget flowers. In ancient Egypt, if you wronged someone, you showed up with a sweetened fig loaf and hoped for the best. Historians still debate how widespread this social bread barter system really was. Some argue it was limited to village life where formal currency rarely reached. Others believe it formed the invisible backbone of Egyptian domestic trade, quietly shaping communities more than temple decrees ever could. The village priest passes by with a basket of round loaves. For the orphans, he tells you. And for the old widows who can't bake anymore, he doesn't expect anything in return. Just nods, smiles, and keeps walking. You spend time with a young woman named Merit who's kneading dough with her elbows while rocking a baby with her foot. Multitasking queen. She says, my husband is a fisherman. He brings home fish and I give his mother 3 loaves for raising him well. Keeps the peace. Then she adds, but if he forgets my birthday again, I'll serve him day-old crusts for a week. You believe her. At a communal oven near the riverbank, a group of neighbors are baking together. They each bring their own dough and take turns using the heat. As one loaf finishes, another is slid in. It's less of a business and more of a rhythm, like a yeasty drum circle. You're offered a small barley roll with honey-glazed payment, apparently for sharing your shadow and listening well. Somewhere mid-morning, a fight breaks out over a burnt batch. A woman insists she paid for soft bread, not brick for my enemies. The baker groans and hands her a fresh loaf with exaggerated care. Everyone claps. Drama resolved. You hear whispers of bread gossip again. That someone's dough won't rise anymore. That another's loaves keep cracking. In a community where bread is both food and currency, bad baking is practically scandalous. Later, you visit a small rural school run by an older scribe. Children sit on mats, learning to read and write symbols for wheat, grain, and you guessed it, bread. When they answer questions correctly, they get a bite of honey dough. Motivation, the scribe winks. You ask him how bread fits into children's lives here. He sighs fondly. Bread is discipline, reward, celebration, apology, currency, faith. It is the alphabet of life. By sunset, you're sitting on a low wall, sharing your last lentil-stuffed loaf with a group of boys drawing donkeys in the dirt. One asks if your shoes are made of bread. You say no, but now you kind of wish they were. As the stars come out and the street quiets, you realize something. All the loaves in this place are different shapes, sizes, textures, but they all hold meaning. A system without gold coins, banks, or contracts. Just warmth, hands, and a shared understanding of what a good loaf is worth. You lean back, head heavy with the scent of cooling ovens and fresh earth, and think, maybe bread is the greatest invention ever. Not just because it feeds you, but because it connects you. Even before the sun rises, the sky above the Nile turns from obsidian to ink to pearl. You stir beneath a woven reed mat, feeling the quiet hum of a world that's just beginning to stretch. The bread sellers aren't shouting yet, but you can already smell the future, warm, yeasty, slightly burnt at the edges. You rise, slow and heavy, limbs doughy from the long journey you've taken through time. The ground is cool under your feet. The village is still, save for a rooster who must have aspirations of becoming the world's most annoying historian. You wander out toward the river. Morning mist clings to the fields like a cotton shawl, and the gentle slap of water against the bank is the only sound. Except for the rhythmic thud of a wooden paddle, you spot an old man in a small boat, gliding by with baskets full of bread. Today is about legacy. And not the grand kind with golden statues or papyrus scrolls signed in ink and ego. No, this is the quiet legacy of ordinary people who baked, bartered, and built a life one crust at a time. You trail the old man into town, watching as he delivers loaves to doorsteps. No knock, no exchange. Just a warm parcel left behind, somehow saying, I see you better than any letter ever could. You pass a small shrine on the road, its stone face weathered smooth. At its base, a single loaf, slightly overbaked, cracked in the middle. Still sacred. You stop in front of a bakery whose doors have been open since before memory. Inside, a young girl is being taught to knead by her grandmother. Not too hard, not too soft, the old woman says. Like scolding your husband. The girl giggles, elbow deep in dough. You see that same dance of generations of passing down skills, rituals, flavors. They're not just making bread. They're preserving identity. That's what's different now as your journey nears its end. You no longer just see bread as food or money. You see it as memory. You remember the construction workers offering loaves shaped like bricks. You remember temple offerings carried on shoulders like treasure. You remember the mothers swapping crusts to settle gossip. You remember the ledgers, the scribe schools, the fish trades, the funerals, the birthdays, the daily deals sealed with barley. Historians still debate whether this was truly a bread economy. Some say bread was merely a supplement to real wages. Others argue it was central to daily life, more stable than silver, more flexible than formal trade. But standing here, watching a child dust flour on her nose and pretend she's the Pharaoh's baker, you feel that the truth is somewhere messier. More human. You see how systems evolve, and not with declarations and drums, but with habits and hands and what people reach for when they need to feel useful. Bread was never just about food. It was about place, belonging, worth. You stroll past a wall carved with hieroglyphs. Some showboats, gods, battles. But one corner? Just loaves. Neatly drawn, stacked like building blocks. And you wonder, maybe those were the real monuments. Not pyramids, not statues, but recipes. The shapes of shared labor. The scent of shared mornings. You walk a little further and find a gathering of elders. They sit in a semicircle, breaking bread slowly, dipping it in spiced oil, passing it hand to hand. One turns to you and says, "This is the bread my grandfather's grandfather made." And another adds, "And probably forgot the salt, too." They laugh. Not big-bellied laughs, just the kind that crinkle the corners of eyes and warm your chest like a fresh roll. You sit with them. You share their bread. No one asks who you are. You're just someone who showed up with empty hands. Later, you pass by a wall painted with scenes of a harvest. Wheat waving under an orange sun. Workers singing. A woman smiling as she pulls a loaf from a communal oven. You stand and stare. You realize something very modern yet very ancient. In every act of baking, there's belief that the world will still be here tomorrow, that your hands can make something good, that someone, somewhere, will be hungry for what you've made. And you think of your own kitchen new. Your shelves of flour, your too strong sourdough starter, your awkwardly shaped first loaves. You realize that even now, thousands of years later, you're part of this legacy. You've used bread as comfort, as celebration, maybe even as a peace offering after an argument. You're part of that same story, stretching across millennia, where the price of a loaf isn't just measured in grain or labor, but in laughter, forgiveness, survival. The breeze picks up. Somewhere a lullaby is being sung, probably to a baby whose first word will be more. More bread, more story, more life. And as you return to your resting place, head full and hands empty, you know you've gathered more than you carried. You've learned something deep in your bones, soft as a crumb but solid as a crust. The world can be broken, chaotic, full of debts and silence. But if there is still bread being shared, there is still a way forward. You lie down, heart full of crumbs and comfort, and let sleep take you. Soft as flour, warm as a rising loaf. As the night deepens, your breathing slows. The noise of the ancient marketplace fades into a soft hush, like flour settling in an empty bowl. You picture a loaf resting after baking, its surface cracked just slightly, still radiating warmth. That's you now, full of quiet stories and simple truths. You feel the weight of history settle gently around your shoulders. Not heavy, not loud, just present. Just comforting. The kind of weight that reminds you that you belong to something long, something resilient. A chain of hands passing down knowledge, passing down love, one loaf at a time. The images drift by slowly. A child dusting flour on their nose. A mother offering a sweet bun instead of an apology. A laborer wiping sweat with one hand, breaking bread with the other. You see them all. You recognize something in each of them. Let your mind grow quiet now. Let the sounds of bread rising, ovens crackling, and ancient laughter soothe you like a lullaby. Time softens here. The world outside grows fuzzy, distant. All that remains is warmth and breath and the memory of a story told in crumbs. Close your eyes, rest your thoughts. Let history whisper you to sleep, not with battles or kings, but with crust and kindness. You are safe. You are full. You are home.